Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. You are tuned into Off Camera Flash for film photography with the wonderful Sandra Coan, who was having a little bit of a smiling battle there. I thought which one of us was going to crack first and start cracking up. And it was totally
No,
real
I was
because
really
I, I was barely containing it. And I'm like, hurry up and go live, hurry up and go live. I got to get this out so I can start laughing. Sandra, what's going on? It's been a while.
It has been a while. It's been at least a year since I've been here on B&H. I'm so excited to see you and to be back. It's going to be fun.
It is. It is. It's great to have you back. We were just talking in the green room about where are we at with film photography now and where are we at with off-camera flash with film. So this is such a great kind of gauging point for everybody out there to take your stuff to the next level. We were talking how a lot of people are into film now, but not as many people are using off-camera flash and not maximizing the results. So we have, I'm gonna proclaim you. So it's not even self-proclaimed, the master, because you're one of the leaders in the industry right now that is still shooting predominantly film, right? And
Yeah,
doing it
yeah,
with off-camera flash, which a lot of
yeah.
people,
It like exclusively.
yeah,
So
they said it couldn't be done.
I
But
know. And yet here I am. So
and you're gonna break it down, you're gonna make it easy for us, and we're gonna answer all your questions. So Sandra, I'm gonna kick it over to you. I'll see you in a little bit for some Q&A, and I will remind everybody to get those questions in. And if you are tuning in late, or if you want have a friend who is like, oh, they need to watch this, it will be available to watch. You can head over to our YouTube channel. Just look up B&H Event Space on YouTube and you will find us. But Sandra, I will turn it over to you and I'll see you in a bit.
all right, let's get going. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will dive in. So are we good, Derek? Everything look good?
Everything looks wonderful.
Okay, well then let's go. As Derek mentioned, I'm Sandra Coan and I'm an industry educator. I'm also a best-selling author and I teach predominantly about light and film. So this is a great topic for me to be talking on here today. This is my book, Crafting the Natural Light Look. You can pick it up at B&H, and there's a whole section in the book on just using off-camera flash with film. So it's really exciting. I'm also an award-winning portrait photographer. I run a photo studio here in Seattle, Washington, which is where I'm from, and I specialize in maternity, newborn, and family photography. I've been doing it for a really long time. And now I work exclusively, like we were just saying, with film and studio lighting in studios. So not only is this like an interest of mine in photography, it's also like what I do is my bread and butter. So like I said, I've been doing this photography thing for a really, really long time. I started my career back in 1999. And of course, in the 90s, we all were film photographers, right? Because that's all there was. So that's how I started my business. Working with film, shooting with film, but I was still using just natural light at that time. In 2007, I made the switch to digital photography because I really thought that that's what I had to do. That's the way the industry was going. And if I was going to stay relevant, I needed to be a digital photographer. So I did that for about 5 years, and digital and I just never got along. I would spend so much time just trying to get my images to look like they had when I shot film. So in 2011, I went back to film. And at that point, I also realized that if I was going to work with film as a studio photographer, so working inside in Seattle, Washington, I was also going to have to learn lighting. So around the same time, I taught myself how to mimic the look of window light using off-camera flash. And that's basically what I've been doing ever since. I tell people all the time that learning how to create my own light was really the best decision that I ever made in my business. But it took me a really long time to get to that. If you look back at that timeline I just shared, for the first 12 years of my career, I worked exclusively with natural light. And I did that because I had a lot of the same beliefs and worries that so many photographers have, and especially film photographers. One of those is I really thought that flash photography was ugly. That like harsh and flashy look. And I really didn't want that. And I also, at that time, we had been into the digital photography world long enough that I couldn't find any resources on using artificial light for specifically for film photographers. And so it just kind of kept me stuck for a really long time until I figured it out on my own. So now I know, of course, that artificial light, it can be anything you want it to be. It can be just as soft, just as natural looking as a window. And it's really beautiful. And I feel like it's really beautiful, especially when paired with film. There is something about this combination of film with artificial light that's like peanut butter and jelly, or, you know, like nut butter and jelly if you have a peanut allergy or whatever. But anyway, it's a great combination. They go great together. It's really beautiful. So I'm so excited to be here and talking to you about this today. Here are some examples of what I'm talking about. These are all taken with off-camera flash. But again, it has that real beautiful, soft, natural look that film photographers love. You can totally create this yourself using a strobe or a flash in studio. So that's what we're going to get in today. And one of the reasons why I love teaching this is that what's wonderful about artificial light is that unlike natural light, artificial light, it's going to always be there. Once you learn this little skill, it is always available. There is not a moment that you will ever pick up your camera and not have light to work with. It's always consistent. It's going to be exactly the way that you want it to be. And that's a game changer. So if you want your work to be light and airy, it can be light and airy. Awesome. If you want something with a little more drama, it can be, you can have a little more drama, but the difference is you get to decide how your work looks. You get to show up and capture something with intention instead of just reacting to the weather or, you know, the available light in the room. And I think that that is a game changer. So we are going to talk about off-camera flash for the film photographer. And maybe you're wondering, you know, why are we doing this, you know, specifically for film photographers? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So what I'm going to share today are those differences when it comes to using off-camera flash, using artificial light as a, you know, with film versus with digital. So today we are going to talk about how film is different from digital sensors, and also why that's important, like why that matters and why you need to know about those differences, particularly when working with a strobe or a flash. Okay, we're going to get into how to meter when you are metering for off-camera flash versus for natural light, but we're also going to talk about how to meter for different types of film you're using. So if you're, you know, working with color film or black and white film or slide film, they're all slightly different, and you need to know that to get really good results. I'm also going to go over what equipment you need, because I know the equipment part can be really overwhelming and really scary. I don't want it to be. And then I'm going to talk to you about how to connect your modern lighting gear, like your studio lighting gear, with your vintage film cameras. So let's get into it. So I mentioned this a little bit, but you know, why are we having a class specifically for film photographers on off-camera flash, right? Like what is this all about? Isn't it the same? And the answer to that is, you know, yes and no. Like how an off-camera flash works, like how the lighting unit works, is of course basically the same, but there are inherent differences between film and digital sensors that you really have to understand if you're going to get good results. And the biggest difference between those two is in exposure latitude. So digital sensors are extremely sensitive to light, which means that they don't have as much exposure latitude, especially on the overexposure side. You know, you can easily overexpose an image. You can easily, you know, blow your highlights, lose information, and all of that. And most digital photographers know that. And so, you know, you'll hear digital photographers talk all the time about how they actually will even err a little bit on the side of underexposure just to protect their highlights and, you know, keep themselves from, you know, losing information on their digital sensor. Well, the opposite is actually true with film, which I think this is really fun and really interesting. So most professional grade film stocks, especially the color film stocks, have tremendous exposure latitude, and especially on the overexposure side. So you can overexpose a roll of film, and particularly, like I said, a color film stock, you know, by 6, 7 stops, and you're not going to lose detail in your highlights. But if you underexpose an image, you're going to quickly, create something that's a big muddy mess, lots of unwanted grain, just not pretty. And so you can't really use an underexposed image. So like I said, it's kind of like the opposite of how we're used to thinking when we're working with digital cameras. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. This is a 7-stop exposure test that I did with a digital camera and with a film camera, just so you could see the differences and see what I'm talking about. And as you can see here at the digital exposure test, at +1, it's a little bright, but it's probably still usable. But by +2, +3, that's, we're really losing so much information on that sensor in the highlights that those really aren't usable images. But when you get into the underexposure side, -1, -2, those are still, usable images there. But now look at the film test. This is where I think it's so fun and so interesting, is you can see that at +1, +2, +3, those images look fine. Though we're not losing any information in the highlights. The +3 looks about the same as the middle exposure, that's that perfect exposure. But when we get into the underexposure side, we start, losing detail in the shadows pretty quickly. And by -2, -3 in exposure, we're kind of, getting a lot of color shifts in the image, and we're getting that real grainy, muddy look, which just isn't pretty, right? Big difference. So here's another example. And both of these images were photographed the same time, same lights, one on a digital camera, one on a film camera. They're both technically overexposed by about 3 stops. And so you can see in the digital image, it's pretty blown out, right? There's like no detail in the blanket. The face is super blown out. The highlights are really blown, whereas the film image looks just fine. So the question is like, okay, well then why, like what is going on here? Why is this happening? And the answer is because with film, when you overexpose, so you're adding more light onto your negative, instead of losing information like you do on a digital sensor, when you add more light to a film negative, you're actually adding information to the negative. And this is called film density. So I'm going to pull up this slide so you can look at the negative, so you can really see this and really understand it, because this is key to learning how to get good exposure with film. So the more light you add to a film negative, the more information gets embedded onto that negative. And you can see here that as we add exposure, those negatives get darker and darker and darker. That's called film density. And what's happening is more light is being etched onto or burned onto that negative. And so we're actually gaining information in the shadows. So in the dark side of the image, you can see it at +1, +2. There's lots of detail in that shadow. And again, because of exposure latitude with film, we're not losing information in the highlights. But if you look on the other side, as we go into -1, -2, -3, that negative becomes what's known as a thin negative. And you can really see it in the shadow parts of those images where that negative looks really thin. There's just not a lot of information in the shadows. So that's what's going on. And here's another example of that. You can tell I love looking at my examples, but I just think this is so interesting and something that you really need to wrap your head around as a film photographer. So again, this middle image, that's like a perfect exposure image at +2. You can see all of that detail in the shadow, in the face, in the hair. This is my posing doll, by the way. I know she's a little bit creepy, but she just sits there so patiently when I'm taking her picture. But you can see all that information in the shadow. Whereas on the negative that is underexposed by 2 stops, that's a really thin negative. We don't have a lot of information in the shadows, which is why that that image is going to look grainy. So when you're working with film, when it comes to, just basic exposure, you really want to make sure that you're exposing your film in a way that you're creating that really good dense negative. So you're getting enough information in the shadow parts that, you're getting some nice density in your negative. So the question, of course, then is how do you do that, right? Well, you do that by metering. Okay. So as a film photographer, metering is like extra important. And, with a digital camera, of course, you can take an image, you can look at the back of your camera and make adjustments. You can't do that with a film camera. So learning how to meter and learning how to meter properly is key. All right. It is the foundation of creating a really good, strong film image. And it can also be a little confusing, especially when you then start working with off-camera flash. So we're going to break it down right now. I'm going to show you how to, first of all, how you need to meter when we're working with flash, and then how to meter specifically when you're working with color film, black and white film, and slide film, because they're all a little bit different. Now, aside from your camera, I believe having a really good handheld light meter is one of the most important pieces of equipment that you can have as a film photographer. It's basically your eyeballs. Okay, it's the back of your camera. It's going to tell you that information that you can't necessarily see because you're not working with a camera that has a screen on the back. So it is your meter's job to help you find middle gray. That's basically what meters are doing. So let's talk about that really quick. What is middle gray? Well, middle gray is a term, of course, that was coined by Ansel Adams when he was developing his zone system back in 1939. And the zone system was developed by Ansel Adams as a way for photographers to be able to, look at and meter a scene. And it was kind of created with black and white film in particular in mind. So the zone systems, there's a lot to it. There are entire books that are written about the zone system and how to use it. But for this class, what I really want you to understand is just the idea of middle gray and how it relates to metering. So for now, all you need to know about the zone system is that there are 11 zones, right? And that they represent the gradation of tones that we see in a black and white image, right? And each zone represents an f-stop of exposure. Middle gray, or zone 5, is that perfect midpoint between absolute black and absolute white. And every meter that is made with that in mind. It is the meter's job to place whatever you are photographing at that middle gray. All right, whatever detail where you tell it to look, it's going to place that at middle gray. But it's your job as the artist to decide where within that photograph you want that middle gray reading to be. And again, this is something that you really want to think about, particularly when you're working with film and with that concept of film density in mind. Now, there are two ways that you can go about taking a meter reading. So the first one is with reflective metering. And reflective metering means that your meter is reading the light that is basically bouncing off of your subject, right? So light's falling on your subject, bouncing back, coming into your camera, and your meter's reading that. So this is the style of metering that we use most of the time when working with natural light and working with our camera's meter, like the internal meter, or if you're in spot meter mode on your handheld light meter. But you can't use this method of metering when you're working with artificial light. So if you're working with, a strobe or a flash on a stand off camera light, you need to use incident metering. So incident metering means that your meter is reading the light that is falling on your subject. And again, this is the only way you're going to get a really good meter reading when using artificial light. So we're going to learn how to do it. Okay. So first of all, to get started, you want to make sure that your meter is set up to meter a flash, to read a flash. And there's, every meter is different. I use Sekonics. I think they're great. On the Sekonic, when you are set to flash mode, you're just going to make sure that your meter is set. There's like a little lightning bolt icon. You want to select that. That's how you know you're in flash mode with a Sekonic meter. Whatever meter you have, you just really want to make sure that it can read both natural light and artificial light, and make sure that you are set to flash mode. Once you're in flash mode, the meter is going to prompt you to enter your ISO and your camera's sync speed or your shutter speed. So the ISO, when you're working with film, is just the speed of the film. So I have T-Max 100 here, T-Max 100, ISO is 100. So if I was shooting portrait 400, my ISO would be 400. Super easy peasy, right? And then your shutter speed, like I said, it needs to be set to your camera's sync speed. And this is really important. So the sync speed is the fastest shutter speed that is recommended for your camera when working with a flash, strobe or flash of any kind. And you want to know what this number is, because if you go over your sync speed, you're going to get this big shutter shadow in your image. You don't want that. So you can find your camera sync speed. Most film photographers, you can still get the manuals online. Or if you go into like a forum or whatever and you ask like, hey, I'm shooting a contacts, what's the sync speed for a contacts, you're going to be able to find there. But once you get your meter set up, you're going to enter in your ISO and your shutter speed based on your camera sync speed. And then you just want to think about what aperture you want to be at. So how do you like to, what is your go-to when you're working with natural light? So for example, for me, I love shooting wide open. I'm always shooting at f2 or 2.8. And so that's always kind of my desired aperture. So when I'm metering for off-camera flash, I'm going to have that in mind. And I'm going to push my test button to take my meter reading, push my test button on my flash so it lights, it flashes. And then your meter is going to tell you, based on the pulse of light that you just got from your flash, what your aperture needs to be at. If you notice that your aperture isn't what you want it to be, then you need to adjust the power on your strobe. So let's say, for example, you are, wanting to shoot at f2.8 and you test your light and your meter's telling you you need to be at f11 to have proper exposure, then you need to turn down the power on your strobe or on your flash to until you reach your desired aperture. So hopefully that makes sense. Pretty easy. And then, like I said, you just keep metering and adjusting the power on your light until you reach your desired aperture. So really simple, easy peasy. Once you've done that, your meter is all set up, you are good to go, and you're ready to start metering so that you can then take your film image, okay? And how you do that really does vary depending on the kind of what film stock you're working with. So when you're working with color film, and when I'm talking color film, I'm talking about the C41 films. So like Portrait 400, Portrait 800, Portrait 160, those traditional color films. Kodak Gold, all of that. When you're working with a color film stock, you want to make sure you're metering for your shadows. So this looks like that. So that meter is facing into your shadow. So again, the darkest part of your image has enough light in it. So you're creating that really nice, good, dense negative, right? So remember this, remember our friend here? When we're metering for the shadow, we're placing our shadow at this box speed perfect exposure, which means the highlights are probably going to be 2 to 3 stops over, which is fine because you don't lose information in your highlights when you're working with traditional color film stocks, right? Especially color film stocks. So meter for your shadows. This is an example of what that ends up looking like. So let's see, what do I got here? This one I took on Portrait 800 and metered for the shadows, f4 in the shadows, and got that. Really beautiful. Now, when working with black and white film, you have a little more leeway. And instead of just metering for the shadows, you can choose where you want to meter within your scene based on the kind of image that you're wanting to create. And I think this is where it gets really, really fun. So we already talked about how the main difference between film and a digital sensor is in exposure latitude, right? And how with color film, it has tremendous latitude, especially on the overexposed side, but not so much when underexposed. Well, the same thing is true of black and white films. But with black and white film, they tend not to have as much latitude in overexposure, but you can also get a more usable image when underexposed. So you have a little more leeway with how you use it. And you can see that in this image. So again, we have our digital example, and then this is a Fuji Acros 100, which sadly has been discontinued. It's one of my favorite film stocks. But you can see at +3, that we still have plenty of detail in the highlights in this film image. But what I love about black and white is that you can notice even down here at -1, -2, those blacks are collapsed. Like that's a thin negative, but you could still make that a usable image. You could pull it into Photoshop, darken up those blacks. You could ask your lab to process it for the highlights, just going to darken up those blacks. Those are still usable images. And this is where you can use your meter to really determine the look of your black and white image. So if, for example, you are wanting to create an image that's a little brighter, that has more shadow detail, then you can go in and meter for your shadows, and that's going to shift the entire image in a little bit brighter because you're putting that really dark part at zone 5, right? That middle gray. If you want an image that is a little more contrasty maybe, or you just want to add a little bit more drama, then you can meter for your highlights. So then the brightest part of your image goes to that zone 5, and then those shadows fall a little deeper, a little darker, a little richer. So again, with black and white, you just meter for where you want your detail to be and the overall look of the image. I tend to meter my black and white for midtones because I just want a nice smooth transition between my highlights and my shadows. So this is an example of one of the portraits I took in my studio, and we've got Ilford Delta 3200, which is one of my favorite film stocks, and metered for those midtones. Now, the other option when it comes to film stocks is working with slide film, which is really fun. So color positive film. And with slide film, color positive film like Ektachrome 100, you want to make sure that you're metering for your highlights. So very different from those C41 traditional color films. And this is why. So backstory, in 2018, Kodak re-released Ektachrome to the market. And I was actually lucky enough to be on the beta test team. So I was able to really spend a lot of time with this film, really get to know it well, play around. It was so much fun. But what I found with slide film is that slide film does not have the latitude of color films. It really does act more like a digital sensor. And you can see that in this example here, but even just by one stop over, those highlights are really hot. And by 3 stops over, those highlights are completely blown out. With slide film, you need to be very precise with your metering. And so metering for those highlights are going to keep you at that box speed, even more towards that -1 exposure, which, is going to be just much more pleasing. With this film, you do want to protect your highlights. So just treat it like you would a digital sensor. It's gorgeous. Highly recommend this film stock if you have not had a chance to play around with it. It is like the colors are so rich and saturation is like chef's kiss. It's so beautiful. But again, treat it like a digital sensor and meter for your highlights when you're working with slide film. So, okay, that was a lot of information. So now that you know the difference between a film and a digital sensor, you know how to set up your meter so that you're metering for artificial light, and how to meter for each film stock. I do want to transition and get into equipment because I know people always have questions about equipment. But before we transfer into that, Derek, do we have any questions coming in about any of the exposure or the metering or any of that? If not, I can just carry on. All right. Sounds like no. Okay. Well, then let me just continue and we'll just get right into it. So let's just dive right into equipment. Okay. So I know that a lot of film photographers shy away from using off-camera flash because they are just worried about the amount of equipment that they need. We're used to as film photographers just going out with a camera around our neck, working with natural light, minimal gear. But the truth is you actually do not need a ton of gear to work with artificial light, which is so great. Really, the only thing you need is you need a stand and a camera, obviously, a light. So we're talking about a strobe or a flash, like a speed light flash, a radio trigger and receiver, a sync cord, maybe we'll talk about that in a second. You're going to need light modifier and an external light meter. So let's break it down and really look at each of those in detail. Okay, so light stands. All you need to know about your light stand is that it's sturdy. You want to make sure that your light stand is strong enough to hold your light and whatever modifier you're going to put on it. I like to have wheels on my light stands because I work in studio and I want to just be able to quickly, easily move it around. Of course, you need a camera. And what I want you to know is that any film camera that you have is going to be compatible with modern lighting equipment. We're going to get into that in a minute. But every film camera that is out there is made to use off-camera flash. People were using lighting with their film cameras long before digital cameras came along, but the way that they do it is a little different. So let's just talk about that really quick. Some film cameras are going to come with a hot shoe. You're probably familiar with a hot shoe. This is that mounting point on top of your camera where you attach a flash unit or another accessory like a trigger. The hot shoe is hooked up to the mechanics in your camera so that when you fire your shutter, it triggers your flash or your trigger so that your light flashes. Some cameras have cold shoes. So a cold shoe gives you basically some place where you can attach your trigger or attach your flash, but it's not hooked up to the electronics in your camera. So in order for it to communicate with your camera, if you have a trigger up there or a flash on your cold shoe, is you're going to need a sync cord to connect it to your camera. And then some cameras like my Rolleiflex do not have a place to attach a trigger or a flash. But you can still use off-camera lighting with a camera like a Rolleiflex. I use my Rolleiflex in studio all the time. And what you want to do is just make sure you have a sync cord that you can attach to the sync port on the camera. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute so that they can communicate. Now, the next piece of equipment that you need to make sure that your camera is communicating to your light is a set of triggers and receivers. So the trigger is what enables your camera to talk to your light. When you have your trigger connected to your camera, either through your hot shoe, your cold shoe with a sync cord, or just the sync port, when you fire your shutter, it's going to trigger and talk to the receiver that is on your light and fire your flash. And so that's how you're going to get that pulse of light. There's lots of different brands out there. If you're using a proprietary system like the Westcott's, like I use, they have their own trigger, but I've found just a simple Pocket Wizard or whatever really works with basically every vintage film camera that I have, and I have a lot. So that's good to know. Just easy peasy, right? And like I said, you're probably going to need a sync cord depending on the kind of camera you're using. If your camera has a hot shoe mount and you're just going to put your trigger on your camera on the hot shoe mount, you won't need this. But if you're, photographing with something like a Hasselblad, one of the 500s, or a Rolleiflex, you're going to need a sync cord to connect your trigger to your camera so that it can talk to the lights. All right. Trigger goes on camera. I already mentioned that. And this is a picture of my trigger on my Hasselblad. And as you can see, I have it connected to the camera using a sync cord so that it'll fire. And then your receiver is what's going to be on your light. This is the oldest picture of these super old Bowens from my studio, but you get the point, where trigger is on the light, or it can be hooked in with a sync cord to your speed light. Now, like I said, a lot of the newer models, the Westcott's or Profoto or those proprietary systems, I'm sure the Godox do as well. I'm not really familiar with that brand, but they have a trigger built into the flash unit. So with Westcott, for example, at my studio, I use the FJ200s or the FJ80, which is their speedlight version, and they have a built-in receiver. So when I use the Westcott trigger, I just need one piece of equipment, and that will trigger that light to flash. But if you're using an older, let's say you have like an old speedlight or whatever in your closet, and you want to use it, you totally can. You're just going to need a sync cord. Okay. So that brings us to your lighting unit. So when it comes to what your actual light is, you have a million choices. You can use a strobe, you can use speed light flash. anything is going to work, and all of those options are going to be compatible with your film cameras, as long as you make sure that your trigger and receiver are set up properly and are communicating. Okay, now let's talk about light modifiers, because the last piece of equipment that you really need is a light modifier. And this part can get really confusing because there's a lot of different choices. So light modifiers are the piece of equipment that you put in front of or on top of your flash to help modify your light, right? They're going to help you shape it and soften it and direct it. And like I said, there's a lot of choices. You walk into B&H, you go into the lighting department, and you are going to see every shape and size imaginable, and it can be really overwhelming. So let's talk about how to figure out what light modifier is going to be perfect for you. Okay, so the shape and size of your light modifier is going to have a huge influence on the light that you're going to produce when you're working with off-camera flash, right? You know that. We already talked about that. So this is really something you want to think about when you are choosing a modifier to work with. I always recommend that before people just buy a modifier, they look at their natural light photos and really try to identify what they love about those photos. You know, identify your ideal light. What kind of light do you like to work with? Do you like soft light? Do you like hard light? You know, start there, because that's going to help you narrow down what modifier is going to work best for you. So let's take that example for, that as an example, just light quality. So what do we know about light quality and working with windows, for example? Well, we know that a big window is going to, produce light that is very soft and diffuse. And the bigger your window, the wider the spread of light you're going to get, right? We all know that just from working with windows. We get it. Opposite is true with small window. With a small window, you're going to have more sharply defined shadows, and you're going to get a smaller spread of light. So the exact same rules apply to modifiers. So when you go in and you're choosing your modifier, start by looking at the size of your modifier. What kind of light are you wanting to produce? Big modifiers are going to produce those really beautiful soft shadows. You're going to get a broader spread of light. And this is just an example of that big modifier that I took to take that image. Where it's a small modifier, you're going to get, much sharper, more defined shadows, and you're going to get a more narrow spread of light. As you can see there, it's a little tiny, tiny modifier. So here are those images side by side, same model, same location, same light. Everything is the same. We're even shooting at the same aperture, ISO, all of that. The only thing that has changed between these images is the light modifier. So when you're choosing yours, what kind of light do you want to produce? Do you want soft light or do you want hard light? And then use what you already know about working with natural light to choose your modifier. Okay. Now, the other thing you want to know about modifiers, now that you know the size of the modifier that you want to use, then you need to think about the shape of the modifier. And the shape of the modifier is really going to affect a few different things. But one of the things that's going to really impact is the look of your catch lights. All right, so a square modifier is going to produce more square-like catch lights, and a round modifier is going to produce round catch lights. Okay, so why is this important? Why do you need to know this? Well, again, what is the look you're trying to create? Maybe you're working outside and you're bringing in off-camera flash to give you a little extra pop of light, a little more drama, all right? But if you're outside, you're probably trying to mimic the look of outdoor light, natural light. And when you're working outside with natural light, you're going to notice that you get a round catch light because you're getting that catch light that looks like the sun. So using a modifier that's going to mimic the look of that is going to just give you a more seamless, more natural look with your off-camera flash. Whereas maybe you're working inside and you're wanting to mimic the look of a window. And so windows are going to give us a more, square looking catch light. And so you can use a square-ish shaped modifier and help you mimic that look, which is really nice. The other thing you need to know is that the bigger your modifier, then the larger your catch lights. So another thing you want to think about depending on the look that you're trying to create. So for example, I work exclusively in studio. And I want my light, the images that I create, I want them to look like natural light. I want them to look like the perfect north light window. All right. And so part of how I do that is I use a really big modifier, because I know big modifiers produce that really beautiful soft light. But also the catch light that I'm creating is really important to me because I want it to look like a window. And I like using umbrellas, which are round. But because I have it, I'm going to bring it in really close to my subject. That round catch light is going to wrap around their eye and give me more of a window light look versus that little small catch light that I showed you in the example that would be more like a sunshine look. So it's just like one little extra step to think about when you're choosing your modifier. Now, whenever I talk about equipment, people want to know what I use, and this is my go-to in my studio. Like I said, I'm a Westcott girl. I'm a Westcott Top Pro, but I was using Westcott equipment long before that happened. And so I use the FJ200 and the FJ80. I have the 7-foot parabolic umbrella, and I do use it in all white. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And then I either am using the Westcott trigger that goes with the lights, or I'm using my Pocket Wizards. The Westcott trigger works great with my Hasselblads and my Rolleiflex, but I have found that with my Contact 645, I use the Pocket Wizards. I also have an Avenger light stand, and like I said, I like to keep mine on wheels. So this is what my set looks like when I'm working. You can see it. It's not huge. It doesn't take up a lot of space. I think of it as just like my portable window, and I bring it with me everywhere I go. If you're thinking of working with off-camera flash and you can imagine it as a window, it becomes a lot less intimidating. You know, this is just your portable window that you're going to create and take everywhere you want to. And then on the image of the right, this is my travel pack, and you can see I have my light stand, and I don't bring my Avenger when I travel. I have a light stand. I have my light with the my trigger, my umbrella, my Rolleiflex, and there's a scene cord there too. You just can't really see it. So now that you have your equipment, the next question is, okay, well, where do you place your equipment? This is really the last piece in putting this all together. Like, where do you put it in order to get the look that you want? And again, when you are working this out, you want to think about what you already know about working with a window. You know how I was just saying how you want to think of your light as a portable window, just a window that you can place wherever you want. And it's always perfect and always great. So when you start thinking about where you're going to place that light in relation to your subject, think of it as a window. If you walked into a room and there was one big window to work with that was perfect, beautiful light, where would you place your subject in relation to that window? How close would you have them? What would your angle be? All of those things are complete, like, easy transition into studio lighting. Same rules apply. So think of what you already know about windows and working with windows, right? You know that the closer you are to a window, that first of all, the bigger that light source is going to be. If you're right up next to a window, it's going to feel a lot bigger than if you're on the other side of the room from that window. So the light is going to be a little bit different. The closer you are, the brighter that light is going to be. And the closer you are, the softer that light is going to be. And again, the same rules apply when working with off-camera flash. All right. So the closer you are to your light source, the bigger that light source is going to be. It's also going to be brighter, and it's going to be softer. So I like I said, to produce really big soft light. I'm going for that north light look. And so I like to use a really big modifier, and then I bring it in really close to my subjects, within 3 to 4 feet of a subject generally. Now, of course, goes without saying, the closer that light is, the brighter that light is going to be. So again, this is where metering is really important. You want to make sure that if you're bringing your light in really close like that, you're metering to make sure you're getting proper exposure, and you're metering, based on the type of film stock you're working with in an appropriate way. If you're moving that light source away suddenly, then that light's going to get dimmer. So you're going to re-meter. Okay. I hope all that makes sense. So let's get into the Sandra Coan method. So I know I told you I was going to talk about why I use that big white umbrella from Westcott the way that I do. People want to know this all the time. The internet loves to tell me I'm doing it wrong. So what you need to know, first of all, is when I first was teaching myself how to create light and how to work with light as a film photographer in my studio. I was doing it for myself. I never thought in a million years I'd be here at B&H teaching about this or writing books about it or anything like that. It was really just me trying to figure this out for myself. I just wanted consistency. I wanted the work that I was creating with my off-camera flash to look like the work that I would get on a perfect day using one of the windows in my studio. And I found that when I used this shoot-through umbrella as a bounce umbrella, I was able to really achieve that. I got this really beautiful, soft light, real subtle shadows, gorgeous catch lights, everything that I wanted to do. I was able to shoot wide open and my work was seamless and consistent. And that is what I wanted. So when I'm working with the light this way, and again, this is Betty, my posing doll, sitting here on the bed for us. You can just see from this picture, I lose a ton of light out the back. Of course I do. And then that light goes out the back and it bounces all around my studio. And it results in this really even spread of light. You can see how even that light is on that back wall and these really super soft shadows. So here's a close-up of that. And just notice how even the light is across the back wall and those really simple soft shadows. I love it. Obsessed. Versus when using a more traditional umbrella, I have both because sometimes I want a little more direction, a little more dark and moody. But with the black umbrella, that light's much more directional. I'm not losing light out the back, and so it's more focused. And you can see it. Look, particularly at the wall behind the doll, there's a little vignette to it. It's a stronger shadow, right? So why the Sandra Coan method? Why do I use my light that way? It's just a matter of preference and taste. I like the results that I get with it. And so, I guess takeaway with this is don't be afraid to experiment. Really study your natural light photos. Learn the kind of light that you like, that you're drawn to, that you want to recreate, and then play around knowing what you know about natural light, like we were just talking about, kind of reverse engineer it until you're getting a look that you want. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that you can really see the difference in between these two. Whenever I talk to people about the Sandra Coan method, they always say, okay, Sandra Coan, I get it. You get the results that you want in your studio and it works, but it probably doesn't work out in the real world because in your studio, you have all these white walls that you're bouncing light around and all of that. But I've actually used this method in a million different places and it always works. So this is just an example of an image that I captured out on the show floor at WPPI. I was at the Westcott booth and I was demonstrating my Sandra Coan method with my reversed shoot through umbrella. And if you've ever been to WPPI, massive, show floor, huge ceilings, there's not a lot of stuff to bounce light off of, and we still got really beautiful results. So I swear by this method, it really works for me and it's really helped me produce this gorgeous natural light look with my strobes and flash. So I'm happy to answer questions about that later. But listen, what I really want you to know is that learning off-camera flash, especially as a film photographer, will transform your work. For me, it really helped me create my signature look and grow a really, really strong brand, which helped me stand out in my market. My work looks very distinct, and I really credit the combination of film and the way I use light in creating that signature style and helping me build the business that I have now. I was able to build my studio to multiple six figures using this approach. And most importantly, I get to show up and be a creator with intention. I think as photographers in general, but certainly as film photographers, we are often just at the mercy of whatever the elements are throwing at us. And we're really good at that. Like that's part of our superpowers where we can come in and we can create and figure it out on the fly. But there's something to be said about knowing what you want and then being able to go in and create it with intention. And certainly when you run a business and your clients are wanting a sense of consistency, that's just so empowering to do. So now I know I can do that. If I want to work with a window, like the image of the little girl, that's a window. I can do that. I know how to do that. I understand window light. I know how to work with natural light. But if I want to work, maybe it's a dark day, or maybe I'm not wanting to use a window or whatever, I can still create work that looks like my work, that with intention, no mistakes, no guessing. I know exactly what I'm going to get. And that is what lighting has given me. And it's really just so liberating. So, if you take one thing away from this talk today, I really do want it to be this: lighting does not have to be complicated to be beautiful. All right. Every film camera you have is going to be compatible with off-camera flash 100%. It is not hard. Okay, it's really just as easy as working with a window. We all know how to work with the window, but it will absolutely change your life forever. It's also really addicting. So sorry, not sorry. Once you get started with this, you're going to fall in love with it. You're going to want to do it exclusively. I'm happy to answer questions now. If you're watching this on repeat, maybe on YouTube or something, and you do have questions for me, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk to people. You can just send me a slide into my DMs on the Instagram and ask me questions and talk about this anytime. There you have it. You can find me at Sandra Coan. Only Coan is spelled funny, right? It's Coan. So yeah. Hey, Derek.
Welcome back. Yes. Well, we didn't have any questions when you broke, but we did have some comments. Hello. Hi, Sandra from Susan. Louisa
hey,
says Sandra hearts. Powell, greetings from Germany. So we have the entire world watching right now.
I just love that.
We do have a question that came in via text message because I told you I was going to send this out to people. And
yeah,
a popular topic is, and this is coming from Cassandra and Christina. If you guys, they're going to be watching the replay. Metering. Metering is what seems to be the one hang up that a lot of people have. Is there a light meter you recommend? And if you could give one or two quick tips of either pitfalls that most people fall into with metering, or just general tips that you've found lead to the most success when light
absolutely metering is the thing. It's like the linchpin. It's the one thing that every film photographer, in my opinion, needs to have. I feel like I'm a relic that I'm like, get a handheld light meter. I'm like the only person in the world that still says that, but I believe it's so true. And especially as a film photographer, because you can't just look at the back of your camera to see if you're getting it right. And so your meter is like your eyeballs or your screen in the back of your camera. It's going to tell you what you're doing. So step one, get a light meter. Now, this light meter is really old. It rattles. I think I bought it in like, I don't know, like 2000. I have a bunch of Sekonics. I have the newer Sekonics. They're wonderful. I recommend everything by Sekonic. I mean, they're classic. You can't go wrong with a Sekonic. So those are the ones I recommend, and just don't be afraid to use it. I gave like very detailed instructions in my book. There's also very detailed instructions on how to set up your meter and also how to meter for different types of film. And then I have them on my YouTube channel too, because I'm a believer. So to answer your question, metering, yes, got to do it. Get yourself a good handheld light meter. You can get them used. I mean, you would know better than me. I'm sure you can get them used at V&H for a couple $100, $300.
It's worth the investment,
especially if you're shooting film, because film's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And, I always tell people it's like buying a latte every time I click the shutter. And so you don't want to be leaving that up to chance. You don't want to mess it up. And chances are, if you overexpose, you're going to be fine, but you underexpose and you've got a big muddy mess. You don't want to do that. And so just invest, take the time, get out your handheld light meter, and then meter the way I told you in the presentation. So when you're metering for color film, meter for your shadows. When you're metering for black and white film, where you want your detail to be. And when you're metering for slide film, meter for your highlights. Easy peasy.
It is easy. And I'm glad you showed the scales too, because it really, you can say it a million times, but to see it, because a lot of people, we think with a digital mindset. And what does everybody say in digital, or most people? Underexposed.
You're on the side on underexposure. Yeah. And you do that with film and it's going to be a disaster.
Yeah. Oh, I can show you boxes and boxes of prints of muddy shadows where it's just like, oh.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. That's why I love talking about that, because it really is like to be able to see it and see it's like it's rethinking the way you approach photography. It's the exact opposite. So where you're erring on the side of underexposure with digital, you really do want to err on the side of overexposure with most film stocks, with the exception of Ektachrome. But like most film stocks err on the side of overexposure.
Mhm. I will
For sure.
say it's super comforting to see that I have the same lighting gear, and I'm like, wait, and I admittedly don't use it when I shoot film. I'm like, now you got
Yeah,
me wanting to try it out. It's only
I
taken how many
know.
times have I sat here and hosted you or seen your workshops, and it's like maybe I should take my own advice that
Please
I'm telling
do.
everybody else in the world. Why should I not tell myself and
Oh
do
my
it?
God. And then send me all the pictures because then I want to see. It's
Oh my,
addicting. Like I said at
it
the end of
is.
the presentation, like, sorry, not sorry, because you're going to get started and it's, it feels like magic for some reason. I don't know. But it's like there's something about film and film emulsion that when it's exposed properly and it has enough light, it is just, it's like fairy dust. It's so beautiful. And that's why I always say like film with off-camera flash is match made in heaven. It's just, they're so perfect together.
Yeah, and looking at the images on Zoom where everything is just throttled and compressed, it doesn't give you like when you look at your images, prints, even full
Yeah.
resolution files, it's so much different than looking at
Yeah.
the cleanest digital file.
Yeah.
Because light
Yeah.
is everything. Sandra's driven it
Light
home
is
today.
light.
Light is everything. It's really is the
It,
quality
it
of your
really
light is
is.
the quality of your image.
Yeah, it's the foundation of everything we do. It really is. It's like the cornerstone for photographers. It needs to be your creative partner. And so you need to be obsessed with it.
And you are.
Like I am.
Well, we love that here. We love passion. You're great at what you
Yeah.
do. So we thank you once again,
Thank
whether
you.
it's in person or virtual. We'll get you back in person
Ah,
eventually.
yeah, I miss New York. Yeah.
Well,
Definitely. Well, hopefully that was helpful. And like I said,
yes.
if people have questions about it, I know that's a lot of information to take in, a lot of rethinking because it is so different from shooting with a digital camera. So if people have questions, please reach out to me. Like I said, happy to answer on the Instagram. I'll keep an eye on YouTube and do my best to get back to people with answers.
Awesome. Well, Sandra, always a
Yeah.
pleasure to have you on. We want to thank you again for your time, your expertise, and to everybody out there watching, no matter where you're watching from, whether you're watching live or a replay, we thank you for your viewership. Definitely go throw Sandra a follow. And if you guys have any questions, she just told you what to do. Reach out to her.
Yeah. Reach
But
out.
that's it. That's all we have for now. Another rendition of the B&H virtual event space in the books. Catch y'all next time.